Right now, if you feel lost, disconnected, or unsure of who you are and where you are going, I want you to hear this clearly. There is nothing wrong with you. What you're experiencing is not weakness. It's not failure. It's not proof that you're behind in life. It's a transition. And transitions are uncomfortable by design. Feeling lost is not a sign that you failed. It's a sign that something inside you has outgrown the life you've been living. Most people are taught to believe that certainty equals success, that if you don't know exactly who you are and where you're going, then something must be broken. But the truth is, feeling lost often shows up when your old identity can no longer carry the weight of who you're becoming. The version of you that knew the rules, followed the path, and fit neatly into expectations is starting to feel tight, uncomfortable, and limiting. And instead of celebrating that growth, your mind interprets it as danger. You're not lost because you're weak. You're lost because you've evolved. The strategies that once worked don't feel aligned anymore. The goals that once drove you don't light the same fire. And when that happens, your nervous system craves familiarity, even if that familiarity no longer serves you. So it labels growth as confusion. But confusion is not the enemy. Stagnation is. Think about this. Every major transformation in life begins with disorientation. When you shed an old skin, there's a moment where you're exposed, unsure, and vulnerable. That doesn't mean you made a wrong decision. It means you're between identities. And that space in between is where most people quit. They rush back to what's familiar because uncertainty feels unbearable. They tell themselves stories like, I should have it figured out by now, or everyone else knows what they're doing except me. Those stories keep them trapped in a version of themselves that no longer fits. Feeling lost is actually an invitation to redefine who you are, not based on survival or approval, but based on truth. It's life asking you to stop living on autopilot and start living with intention. The discomfort is there to get your attention, to force you to slow down, to question beliefs you've never questioned before, to stop chasing outcomes that were never truly yours. When you don't know who you are anymore, it's because the labels you once relied on have expired. And that's not something to fix. It's something to explore. This is the moment where you get to choose consciously instead of reactively, where you get to design instead of drift. But that requires courage because the mind wants guarantees and growth offers none. The irony is, the moment you stop fighting the feeling of being lost, it begins to guide you. When you stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what is this trying to show me, everything changes. This phase is not about finding quick answers. It's about asking deeper questions. And those questions, asked honestly, will lead you to a level of alignment, power, and clarity you've never experienced before, because this version of you has never existed before. Confusion has a bad reputation, but it is one of the most misunderstood experiences of growth. Most people think clarity comes first and action follows, but in real life it works the other way around. Confusion often shows up when you are standing at the edge of a breakthrough, not when you are moving backward. It appears when your old answers no longer make sense and your new answers haven't arrived yet. That space feels uncomfortable because the mind hates the unknown, but the unknown is where every meaningful change begins. When your life is about to expand, certainty disappears. You stop feeling sure about decisions that once felt automatic. You question paths you once trusted. You wonder if you've been chasing the wrong things. This isn't life punishing you, it's life interrupting your patterns. If you stayed certain, you would stay the same. Growth requires you to release false clarity so real clarity can be built from a deeper place. Think about any major shift you've ever made. Before you gained confidence, you felt unsure. Before you discovered purpose, you questioned everything. Before you found strength, you felt weak. Confusion always precedes elevation. But most people interpret that moment as a signal to retreat. They assume something is wrong instead of realizing something is rearranging itself inside them. The mind wants immediate answers because answers feel safe. But safety is not the goal of evolution. Expansion is. Confusion stretches you beyond what you know, forcing you to develop new awareness, new emotional strength, and new standards for your life. It slows you down just enough to make you pay attention. It disrupts your autopilot so you can choose consciously instead of repeating habits unconsciously. This is why people often quit right before things change. They leave the job just before they gain confidence. They abandon the relationship just before learning how to communicate. They give up on themselves just before clarity begins to form. They confuse discomfort with danger and walk away from the very experience that would have transformed them. If you're confused right now, it means your mind is being challenged to grow beyond its current limits. That tension you feel is the space between who you were and who you are becoming. And while it feels unstable, it is also powerful. Because in that space, you are no longer confined by old definitions. You are open. You are questioning. You are available for a new level of insight. Clarity doesn't arrive as a lightning bolt. It arrives as a series of small realizations, each one earned through uncertainty. When you stay present instead of escaping, when you lean in instead of pulling away, confusion begins to organize itself into understanding. What once felt chaotic starts to make sense. And one day you realize that the moment you thought you were lost was actually the moment everything began to align. When certainty disappears, most people panic, but what they don't realize is that uncertainty is not a void. It's an opening. The loss of certainty doesn't mean your life is falling apart. It means the rigid structure you were living inside of is loosening. And in that looseness, something new has room to breathe. Certainty keeps you efficient, but it also keeps you limited. It locks you into what you already know, what you've already proven, and what feels familiar. When certainty fades, awareness begins to expand. Self-awareness doesn't grow in comfort. It grows when your assumptions are challenged. When you're no longer sure what path to take, you're forced to look inward instead of relying on external rules. You stop asking, what am I supposed to do, and start asking what actually feels right for me. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because now your decisions aren't being driven by expectation or fear, but by alignment. Uncertain why slows you down, and that's intentional. It creates a pause where you can observe your patterns, your reactions, and your beliefs. You begin to notice how often you chase certainty just to avoid discomfort. You see how many of your choices were about control instead of fulfillment. And with that awareness comes power. You can't change what you're not aware of, and uncertainty shines a spotlight on what's been running your life in the background. This is why feeling unsure often brings deep emotional intensity. Old fears surface, old doubts get louder. But that doesn't mean they're stronger, it means they're being revealed. Uncertainty exposes what needs to be healed, released, or redefined. It brings your inner world to the surface so you can finally deal with it consciously instead of carrying it unconsciously. In this space, you have a choice. You can numb yourself and rush back to certainty, or you can stay present and listen. Listening doesn't mean having all the answers. It means being honest about what no longer fits. It means admitting when you've been living on autopilot. It means allowing yourself to question identities, goals, and definitions of success that were never truly yours. As awareness deepens, something powerful happens. You start to feel less lost, not because you've figured everything out, but because you're more connected to yourself. You trust your inner signals more than external noise. You become comfortable not knowing because you know you can adapt, learn, and respond. That confidence doesn't come from certainty, it comes from self-trust. The paradox is that when you stop chasing certainty, clarity begins to emerge naturally. It shows up as intuition, as alignment, as a quiet knowing instead of a loud answer. And you realize that losing certainty didn't weaken you. It awakened you to a deeper level of understanding, presence, and inner DI. Rection that had always been there, waiting for the noise to fade. Most people are taught to run from feeling lost, to fix it quickly, to distract themselves until the discomfort fades. They scroll, they stay busy, they jump into new plans, new goals, new identities, anything to avoid sitting with the unease. But feeling lost is not a problem to escape. It's a message to be decoded. And the faster you try to silence it, the longer it stays with you. That feeling is your internal guidance system recalibrating. It shows up when your external life is no longer aligned with your internal values. Something you're doing, chasing, or tolerating no longer matches who you are becoming. And instead of slowing down to listen, most people drown out the signal with noise. Productivity becomes a hiding place. Busyness becomes a coping mechanism. But movement without awareness only deepens the disconnect. When you allow yourself to actually feel lost without judging it or rushing to solve it, something remarkable happens. The discomfort begins to speak. It reveals where you've been betraying your own needs. It shows you where you've been living for approval instead of truth. It exposes patterns you've repeated simply because they were familiar, not because they were fulfilling. This isn't comfortable work, but it is liberating. Avoidance keeps you stuck in cycles. Listening breaks them. When you stop fighting the feeling and start getting curious about it, you reclaim your power. You begin to ask better questions. Not how do I make this go away, but what is this asking me to change? That shift alone can transform your entire direction. Because the feeling of being lost isn't random. It's precise. It's pointing directly at what needs your attention. Most people never receive the lesson because they never slow down long enough to hear it. They repeat the same relationships, the same careers, the same habits, wondering why fulfillment never lasts. They treat the symptom but ignore the cause. Feeling lost keeps returning because the message keeps being ignored. When you listen instead of escape, you start noticing subtle truths. You realize you've outgrown certain environments. You see that some goals were driven by fear, not passion. You recognize that you've been saying yes when your soul wanted to say no. These realizations can be uncomfortable, but they're also empowering because awareness gives you choice, and choice is the foundation of change. The irony is that the moment you stop resisting the feeling of being lost, it begins to lose its grip on you. It no longer controls you because you're no longer afraid of it. You see it as guidance rather than a threat. And once you understand the message, the feeling doesn't need to scream anymore. It softens, it shifts, it leads you forward. Feeling lost isn't there to punish you, it's there to redirect you, but only if you're willing to listen, reflect, and respond with honesty. The path forward doesn't come from running faster. It comes from going deeper and allowing the discomfort to show you the truth you've been avoiding all along. The moment you change the meaning of what you're experiencing, you change the direction of your life. Meaning is the lens through which you interpret every event, every emotion, every challenge. When you label feeling lost as failure, your body collapses, your energy drops, and your options shrink. But when you redefine it as preparation, as refinement, as a signal of growth, something shifts inside you immediately. The situation may be the same, but your power within it is completely different. Direction doesn't disappear because you're broken. It disappears because the old reasons that once drove you no longer matter. And until you redefine what matters now, motivation feels impossible. Most people wait for clarity before they act, but clarity is created when you decide what this moment means. Meaning always comes before momentum. When you consciously choose a new meaning, you stop being a victim of circumstance and become the author of your experience. Feeling lost becomes a sign that you're being invited to design a life that's more aligned, more intentional, more authentic. It becomes evidence that you're no longer willing to settle for surface-level fulfillment. That shift in meaning restores a sense of direction because now your actions are rooted in purpose, not panic. Redefining meaning doesn't require having all the answers. It requires commitment. Commitment to growth, commitment to honesty, commitment to making this phase count instead of wishing it away. When you decide that this chapter exists to strengthen you, to refine your values, and to deepen your self-trust, every experience inside it becomes useful instead of painful. As meaning changes, your focus changes, you stop obsessing over what you've lost and start noticing what's being revealed. You pay attention to what energizes you and what drains you. You listen more closely to your intuition because you're no longer trying to force certainty. Direction begins to reappear, not as a rigid plan, but as a series of aligned steps. One insight leads to one action. One action leads to clarity. Clarity leads to confidence. This is how people find their way without having a map. They don't wait for the fog to lift. They move with intention inside the fog. They trust that. Each step, taken with the right meaning, sharpens their awareness. Over time, the path becomes visible because they are no longer walking blindly, they are walking consciously. The truth is, direction is not something you discover once and keep forever. It evolves as you evolve. Every time you outgrow a version of yourself, you must redefine what matters. And that process always begins with meaning. When you choose empowering meaning, even uncertainty becomes fuel. You don't find direction by eliminating doubt. You find it by deciding who you are in the middle of doubt. And when you make that decision with strength, honesty, and intention, the feeling of being lost transforms into forward movement, clarity, and a deeper connection to the life you are meant to create.